Hello, everyone. This week's Bitch Better Have My Money lectures will be brought to you from the Golden Pagoda in Kyoto, Japan. In this lecture, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the vocabulary you'll need in order to understand economic systems. In order to understand economic systems, we first have to define it. And the economic system of a society is the overarching structure which has been designed and serves the function of organizing all behaviors and actions related to resources, wealth, distribution of resources, labor, technologies related to economics, etc. So this includes production and consumption, labor and exchange, barter and trade. All of that falls within a particular system in our society, and that system is our economic system. That's its definition. So one of the things that anthropologists look at when we try to understand a society's economic system is to look at land allocation. How is land distributed within the population? Like, foragers, hunters, and gatherers don't really have the concept of land ownership whatsoever. Nomads, kind of the same way. Like, territory may be favored at certain times of the year, but there's not that concept that land is owned by the group or owned by an individual. Now, pastoralists will share land, and usually within tribal communities, they'll share land. Farmers, however, they are super territorial, because if you go through all the effort of tilling the land and planting the seeds and getting rid of all the weeds and keeping animals from eating it, you don't just want some random Joe to walk in and take all your crops when they're ripe. That would be a douchebag thing to do. We call that stealing. And in order for that concept of stealing to exist, you have to have the concept of property. So farmers have to protect all of the work they've done by having ownership of land. And so that's why territoriality is associated with agriculture, because once you've done all of that agricultural work, you want to protect that effort and that land. And so you put a fence up, and so you guard your land, you get a guard dog, etc., etc. Economic anthropologists are also interested in understanding economic systems and where production fits within that system. And production is the way that we extract resources from the earth and how we use labor in order to process those resources. So we use technology to do it, and we take things from the earth and we turn them into goods. That's production. And how do we do that? We run machines and we use labor. Labor is the work of humans. Labor can be physical, or labor at this point, I'd actually expand it to say it can also be mental, right? And laborers in previous generations were involved in unions. Unions are becoming rarer and rarer, but that doesn't mean they are unnecessary. In many ways, we still don't have a lot of rights for labor workers. We've definitely got rid of some of the worst abuses, like child labor and like 18-hour days and things like that. But definitely labor rights are a major issue in a number of societies today. And so there's very little cultural consistency about the concept of labor. In other words, different societies treat the idea of labor differently. They distribute labor differently. They pay labor differently. They even talk about it and symbolize about it differently. So there's not really a lot of cultural consistency when we think about the concept of labor. Now, there are a variety of ways that societies can distribute goods, which means having large amounts of certain resources and distributing them or passing them out amongst their society. And I'm going to focus on 4 of them and break them down for you, which is sharing, gift giving or reciprocity, barter, trade, and redistribution networks. Now, I talked a little bit about gift giving, and that's reciprocity. And we get our theories of reciprocity from a French anthropologist known as Marcel Mauss. And he says there are 3 different types of reciprocity or gift giving. The first is generalized. This is like your closest homie gift giving. There are no rules. There's no keeping score. It's just like, man, I get the beers this time and you get the beers next time, because like I always know you're good for it and you know I'm always good for it, man. Like, we don't keep like tabs. We don't keep numbers. That's generalized reciprocity. Like, everybody has that bro where like you just don't keep count from, because you both know you're good for it and you guys know Like you're solid, you're best. Like it's not about the money, man. You don't even count it, right? Then there's balanced reciprocity, which is where, okay, I gave you this much, so you are supposed to give me that much back. And we understand this and we're totally cool with this transaction. So this is like when you give a gift to your friend for Christmas and they are kind of expected to give you one back in around the same price range. Whereas, negative reciprocity is like the mooch. That's the worst one. That's the guy who always like doesn't have his credit card at the end and then you end up having to pay the tab. The guy who like always expects you to like pay for the beer. That's negative reciprocity. So generalized is when like you don't even think about it, bro. Balanced is like, hey, we're cool. Like I give you, you give me, we're all good. And negative is like, why are you such a fucking mooch, man? I cannot deal with you. So we have barter and trade. Barter is when you exchange products that you have too much of for products that you need more of, but it is highly personalized. And one of the things I absolutely loved when I lived in Morocco was bartering for goods. So in the city that I lived in, the part of the city that I lived in, which was about 500,000 people, there weren't prices written on any of the goods, and you actually had to go and negotiate with someone for the price of those goods, and that's bartering. If it is organized and there are clear set prices and the exchange is clearly marked, that's trade. So barter is unorganized and casual. Trade is formalized and structured and organized with set prices. That's trade. And as I talked about, you have redistributive networks. A redistributive network is where some organizer collects all the resources and then distributes them to the communities, sometimes at a public event or in some other public way. This includes things like your taxes, right? But this also includes some case examples which were talked about in the book. So the one talked about in the book that I want to cover that I think is really interesting is the concept of potlatch. Potlatch comes from Pacific Northwest, PNW, Pacific Northwest First Peoples. We call them Native Americans. In Canada, they're called First Peoples. And what happens is high status people like chiefs are often given gifts, basically as a way to suck up for them. And so when you have an important event like a birth or a wedding or something like that, you have a potlatch where this wealthy person will, or high status person will bring all of the gifts that he's been given that are in excess that he doesn't need, and he'll put them all in front of him. And then anybody who comes to the party can come and pick what they want and take it home. So it's basically a way for wealthy people to redistribute all of their goods to the rest of society. In addition, the wealthy people have to buy a bunch of food and feed everyone. And you're like, why? And it's because they're the wealthy people. That's how they show how fucking cool they are. That's how you show off in this society. And in the end, it redistributes wealth from powerful people back to poor people. So the powerful people are still powerful. They're going to keep getting gifts and people are going to keep giving them gifts to try to curry favor with them, but they're going to redistribute that wealth back into the community. So poor people are never entirely fucked. Like it would be awesome if we could figure out some kind of potlatch where billionaires were forced to like hook up their employees with money. Oh wait, that's called paying them a fair wage. My bad. But if we had some kind of system where wealthy people just like gave away all the free shit that they were constantly given to poor people who don't have shit. That's a potlatch, and I wish we had something like that in our modern system. Whew, that was a long one. Thanks for sticking with this Bitch Better Have My Money lecture, and hopefully you are more comfortable with some of the economics terminology that we will be using this week in our discussions of economic anthropology. Thanks so much for listening.